Welcome to Hack Your Happiness.
We kind of have a saying at NASA about how spaceflight is a team sport. Like, it doesn't happen because of anybody's one individual effort, right? People working together. And I think that's really true of any endeavor, and you can just even make that more broader of any person's individual life.
Are you a teen or adult looking for more happiness in every day and ways to connect with people in your life?
You've come to the right place. Hack Your Happiness is a podcast designed to bring you the behind the scenes of what brings iconic individuals happiness, plus their life hacks.
I'm Mercedes.
And I'm Anastasia.
And we're the two teens behind Small Bits of Happiness.
We're interviewing Olympic athletes, entrepreneurs, celebrities, and more.
Throughout all of our episodes, you'll find great conversations, hacks that you can take away and try in your life, inspiration, as well as unique and surprising insights. Today, we are speaking with Dr. Ellen Ochoa.
Well, I grew up at a time when everybody was talking about space. It was the Apollo program.
3, 2, 1. We have ignition. We have liftoff.
Astronaut Ellen Ochoa.
Ellen Ochoa.
Dr. Ellen Ochoa has received numerous awards
As the world's first female Hispanic astronaut.
What would you say are your top 3 tips for teens to ask for what they need?
So I think the first thing is, figure out who your team is.
Could you describe to us what you felt in the moment of first seeing space and the Earth?
This was such a more vivid view that it just really blew me away.
But originally, you were rejected from NASA. How did you keep going at this specific goal?
It was something I loved doing. There was really no downside in continuing to update my application.
Welcome to Hack Your Happiness. Welcome, Dr. Ochoa.
Well, thank you. Really glad to be with you today.
Yes, thank you. Anastasia and I have read so much about you. We love your work, and you're so inspiring. And you're such an iconic astronaut. So take us back to the beginning of your journey as a teen. How did you find your interest in space?
Well, I grew up at a time when everybody was talking about space. It was the Apollo program, and the Apollo 11 astronauts landed on the moon just after I finished up elementary school. Summer before I started junior high. So certainly everybody was talking about it. But of course at that time there weren't any women astronauts. And so it certainly never occurred to me that this might be something that I could grow up and do. But then, I went through high school, I went into college, actually wasn't in science or engineering at all initially. But about halfway through my undergrad years, first of all, I decided to try physics and liked it and selected that as my major. And maybe just a few months later, NASA selected the first group of astronauts that they planned to train for a new vehicle that they were developing, the space shuttle. And it was going to be doing a lot of different things, including a lot of science and engineering experiments. And so they were looking for a broader array of people. You needed a background in science and engineering or math or medicine, but they weren't just really looking for military test pilots. And so that class they selected included the first 6 women and the first astronauts of color. And that was a huge milestone. And then a few years later, I guess about 5 years later, Sally Ride flew in space, first American woman in space. And that was another huge milestone, and she had been a physics major like me. And so that was when I really started to think about, well, maybe this is something that I could do. Maybe I should try applying to NASA at some point.
I think that is amazing. I mean, your entire journey, it sounds like, has been amazing. I mean, clearly you were successful and you've gone to space so many times and had so many successful missions.
And I just think it's so inspiring how, you have trailblazed this path to a career in space for so many girls and so many women and so many people of different nationalities. And I just think you are such a massive role model for that.
Exactly. How did you overcome your greatest challenge, and what exactly was it?
We just want to quickly say, check out our happiness wellness products designed by us for individuals of all ages to help you bring a small bit of happiness to your home with our tangible tips and tools. Check them out in the show notes.
Well, I would say probably it was that at the time that I went into physics and then in graduate school and into engineering, there weren't very many women. And really, I don't think I knew any other women that had a Hispanic background. So I didn't really see people like me. And, I would occasionally run into people who really did try to discourage me. For example, when I was an undergraduate at San Diego State, and I had taken a lot of math, which I liked, but as I mentioned, I really hadn't been into science, and I thought, well, I should look at some of the subjects that use the math that I've been learning. So I went to talk to a couple different professors. One of them was in the electrical engineering department, and he was clearly not at all interested in having me in his department. He's like, well, we had a woman come through here once, but, it's a difficult course of study. I don't know that you'd be interested in what we do here, which was just ironic because I had set up the appointment saying, well, I'm interested in finding out what you do. And he really didn't give me any useful information at all. But fortunately, I got a much different reception when I went to talk to a physics professor. He said he was glad to hear I was interested in physics. He told me about careers that people could have if they majored in physics, which was actually really important because I didn't have a good idea of what those were. And, it's kind of hard to select a major if you can't really picture, where that might lead later in life. And then when he asked about my math background and I told him I was finishing up the calculus series, he's like, well, that's great. You've already learned the language of physics. And, if you started taking our classes next semester, you could concentrate on the concepts, whereas most of the students will be trying to learn those two things simultaneously. So I think you do really well. So, I can repeat different kinds of episodes like that as I went on in school and even early in my career. And so, again, would occasionally run into people who just didn't think I should be there. But fortunately, also always had people in my life who helped support and encourage me. And I think that's what allowed me to just keep plowing through because there were people there that were supporting.
Oh, I think that is so endearing because it's true. Like you mentioned, there was a lot of pushback and there was challenge, especially at the time, with women in the field. And so I think it's so inspiring how you didn't give up even when you were not being supported and you kept going until you found a strong support system. And I think that you touched on something that a lot of teenagers struggle with in regards to asking for help when they need it.
Yeah.
Advice or help with homework or schoolwork. And so what would you say are your top 3 tips for teens to ask for what they need, be it in school, help, any other realm of life?
Well, we kind of have a saying at NASA about how spaceflight is a team sport. Like, it doesn't happen because of anybody's one individual effort, right? People working together. And I think that's really true of any endeavor, and you can just even make that more broader of any person's individual life. There are always people that are sort of on your team, if you want to think of it that way. So I think the first thing is, figure out who your team is. Who are those people that you can turn to? If it's just to kind of have a conversation about what's on your mind or, something's happened that's discouraged you, somebody who will listen. But then also look for those people who you think their advice is really useful to you and that they can provide constructive advice. And I think the flip side of that is don't be discouraged by people who don't know you. When I look back on the people who were discouraging me, they didn't know me at all. So it wasn't about me personally. It was just they had a picture in their mind of what an engineer, what a scientist looked like. I didn't fit that picture, and so they kind of dismissed me because of that. So look for those people who know what you can bring. I mean, maybe it's intelligence, maybe it's hard work, maybe it is the willingness to ask questions. I know when I was a physics major, if I was having trouble with the homework or understanding the concepts, I definitely took advantage of my professor's office hours where, they're there and students can come by and ask questions. They literally set up those periods of time for students to come by and ask questions. So, that's one of those things you should just take advantage of. Sometimes there's also, groups or clubs, like a student chapter of the Society of Women Engineers or the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. I didn't know very much about that when I was in school, but I know nowadays there's lots of those chapters at lots of schools. And then you can find other people who are sort of experiencing the same thing you are. And I think maybe that makes it an easier environment to go ahead and ask for help. And sometimes you can do it in a very subtle way, just saying, hey, tell me what's worked for you,
I think that's so powerful. I mean, firstly, building a network of individuals that, you relate to, and you can almost like ask questions in a more like, conversational manner, like
right.
What worked for you better. I think that's really smart, just kind of building in a question into a sentence so it almost doesn't seem like a question. And also just taking advantage of office hours, I think, is so important because they're there for a reason.
Exactly.
Your teacher is there to help you. And I think that oftentimes though teens get kind of like some fear of like, I don't know, like maybe the teacher thinks that you're stupid or something, but in the end the teacher isn't thinking that. But I know that oftentimes I feel really nervous when I'm trying something new or something scary, like going on a roller coaster, but I don't feel scared until I'm like in the moment. When you were going to space, did you feel any fear for the first time? And how did you overcome these feelings of fear?
Well, I guess when I think of, when I was sort of lying on my back on the launch pad, I wouldn't say I felt fear. Certainly there was an amount of, I would say, nervous excitement. Of course, I talked to a lot of my fellow astronauts to know what to expect during launch, and we had done a lot of training. But you still know, well, I've never actually done this myself. I'm not sure exactly what it's going to be like. So there was some of that. But I think what really prevented me from, kind of freaking out, which, given that you're sitting on 500,000 pounds of explosive fuel, it would be easy to to do that, was the training that we had. We did spend a lot of time on training specifically for those really dynamic phases of flight, for the launch, for the landing. And we went through lots of different scenarios with on the ground, of course, but in simulations with things going wrong, different pieces of equipment not working, things not going wrong. And so as a crew and also working with the team in mission control, we'd worked through lots of different scenarios and we had a certain amount of confidence that for a lot of things that might go wrong, we knew exactly what to do, and we'd be able to figure it out on the fly and get through it. And so I can remember just sitting there thinking, okay, I've been here before, even though I hadn't actually been there, but in training, we'd done it hundreds of times. I've been here before, we're well trained, we know what to do, and now I'm excited about actually getting into space.
Oh, I love that. And I think that what you've said is so relatable to so many teenagers, even if we're not traveling to space. It's just like the aspect of practice makes perfect, and build up your own confidence and certainty within yourself, be it, a sports practice or remembering past times that you've done something similar. Like if you're going to go and give a big speech or presentation and you're really, really nervous, of course, practice ahead of time, as well as, remember the last time that you did this and how you have survived and made it through. And same goes for like going to a new place or traveling, going on a roller coaster, whatever you might
using
worry
like
about.
Previous experience to kind of aid you, even if it's not like the exact same thing.
Right.
You can almost like take some like the principles, even if you're scared of asking a question, for example, you can still be like, oh, well, one time I asked my friend for advice and this is how they reacted, or maybe I saw my friend asking the teacher a question like 2 days ago and the teacher seemed fine with it, so they'll probably be the same with me.
Right.
And so, as someone who has gone to space multiple times and spent thousands of hours in space, I've really been wondering this question. It's, could you describe to us what you felt in the moment of first seeing space and the Earth from a new and unique perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really special experience, you know, seeing the planet from above and just in a way that you never get to see it. I will say, on shuttle flights, you're really busy, and especially right when you get into orbit, there's just a whole lot of things you have to do. And so I can remember, rather than looking out the window right away, you know, I was concentrated on, okay, I need to, you know, take off my helmet, I need to take off my gloves, I need to put my gloves in my helmet and then in my helmet bag so they don't float away, and then I've got to tie off my helmet bag so it doesn't float away, and then I have to get this camera out and take pictures of the external tank. And, you know, so for the first few hours, you're just sort of methodically going through all of these things, and you're trying to be you're just really concentrating so that you don't like mess anything up or lose anything, you know, that floats away. So I can remember a couple moments, but one of them was like literally a couple days later. We had maneuvered. The first couple days we were in an attitude, in other words, the orientation of this space shuttle, where we had our main window faced toward the sun because of the instruments in our payload bay, and we were measuring various things coming from the sun. And then this one day I woke up, and overnight we had maneuvered so that our main window was facing directly toward Earth. So I got up, went up to the flight deck, and that was the first time I really got to look directly down on Earth as we're orbiting, you know, going over the land at 5 miles a second, so you can cross the United States in 10 minutes or so. And it was just spectacular. Of course, I'd seen photographs, I'd seen videos from other flights, but this was such a more vivid view that it just really blew me away. And I think the other thing that really caught my attention was on my first 2 flights, we were studying the Earth's atmosphere, particularly the problem of the ozone hole and ozone depletion. And so when we looked out at the Earth and we looked at the curvature of the Earth, the limb of the Earth, what you see is this very thin blue line or blue ribbon, which actually is the atmosphere, right, above the land or the ocean. And it's beautiful, but it's also very thin. It looks so fragile, and you know that's the health of that is the only thing keeping people alive on Earth, or actually keeping any living thing on Earth, but certainly people. And you realize, you know, you cannot take it for granted, let's put it that way, that we really need to keep our planet healthy for our own sakes, as well as all the other living things on Earth.
That is so extraordinary.
That is absolutely amazing. I feel like, you know, the photos just don't do it justice. It's like when you take a photo of like a sunset and you're like, oh, well, I mean, it's so much prettier in real life. I feel like it's very similar to that. And it sounds
I think it's so interesting how you said like we have to be thankful for all of the beautiful nature and plants and, you know, fresh breathable air, because it's true, like it's protected and you learn about it in school and like online, but being able to actually tangibly see the ozone layer and see the atmosphere and everything,
and see how thin it is and how that thinness is still able to protect such a huge amount of people from so much that could happen.
I think it's so interesting.
Yeah, and you know, it sounds like you've had an incredible experience with NASA, but originally you were rejected from there multiple times, but you kept going and has had now an extremely successful career with NASA. So how did you keep going at this specific goal even though you had rejection?
Well, so I mentioned when I was in graduate school is when I got really interested. And so I decided as soon as I got my PhD that I would send in my application to NASA, which I did. But honestly, I really never expected to hear anything from NASA or maybe just something, you know, we got your application. Because thousands of people were doing the same thing that I was doing, and it was just really hard to picture how are they going to find my little application, you know, among all these others. And NASA only selects astronauts every few years, when they need them. So it was a couple years later when I got a call and I was asked to come down and interview. And, that was just thrilling. My first time at Johnson Space Center or any NASA center. But I wasn't selected that year, as you mentioned. But I was really excited to hear that out of the original several thousand applications, I made it to the final 120. That's how many are actually invited to come down in person. And I could also see ways that I could make my application better. So I had a very good educational background. I had, by that time, worked a couple of years as a research engineer at a national lab. But one of the things I didn't have was any kind of operational experience. So I decided I would get my private pilot's license, which is something that I thought would be really fun to do anyway. And I had a brother who had a pilot's license, but that would give me a little bit more of an idea of what it's like to be in charge of some kind of aircraft and how you have to make those decisions, sometimes which can come up really quickly. And I also decided I wanted to work for NASA even if I was never selected as an astronaut. So I actually moved to a position as a research engineer at one of NASA's research centers. And then I guess 3 years after my initial interview, NASA was doing another selection. Of course, I updated my application with all this new information and got a chance to interview again. And that time I was selected. So first of all, I guess I had a couple things that I felt like would make me a better candidate. But also, I had a good job as a research engineer, and I was working at that job, and I was publishing papers, and I got a few patents along the way. And so even if I'd never been selected, I had a really interesting career. And I think that was important for eventually getting selected as an astronaut. It was something I loved doing. I was, excelling in a way that I was probably standing out from other people with the same amount of experience as I did and same amount of education. And so there was really no downside in continuing to update my application, but also realizing that I had a good career anyway.
I just love your story so much because it's so true. And what I love the most is that you kept going. When you didn't get the job at first, you didn't just withdraw and, pivot and look towards a different opportunity, which you could have totally done. And I'm sure you would have also been wildly successful at that. But rather, you kept on going and you looked for, what can I learn from this rejection and this setback? And exactly like Anastasia just said, you grew and you managed to get the job. And I think what you said there about your passion, it really, really, really shone through, and it came through and made you an even better candidate.
For sure. And I think it's so important that when you face rejection, you're not like, oh, well, that was it. I guess that means I'm just not good enough.
And that this is never going to happen.
Exactly. And then you just kind of shut down and everything. Instead, you face it with, okay, I'm going to still reapply, but how can I stand out even more? Because clearly they still found you incredibly interesting the last time because they were able to interview you and everything.
Right.
It was just a matter of stepping it up a little bit more and just kind of looking at what am I also interested in and expanding and exploring more into that as well.
Always looking for ways to grow through all of your experiences. And so you've paved the way in the industry of space for so many people, like we've talked about. But did you ever feel any sense of imposter syndrome? And if so, what would you say is your top piece of advice for believing in oneself and keeping on going?
Well, I certainly felt uncomfortable in certain situations, and that I didn't know very much, or I didn't know as much as other people when I looked around. When I was first selected as an astronaut, some of the training was very familiar to me. We got a big stack of workbooks, a foot tall. Of course, it's all online these days, but it was actually in paper back then. But I'd spent 10 years in college. I knew how to study, and I knew how to learn a material, so that felt pretty comfortable. But there are a lot of things I didn't know anything about. We had to learn how to land under a parachute on land and in water, and how to get picked up by a Coast Guard helicopter, and to fly in high performance jets, which, believe me, is quite different than flying in a little Cessna. And so those things, I just had no background in at all. But I was like, well, NASA's already selected me. They must feel like I'm capable of learning these things. And also, my fellow astronauts in my astronaut class were really helpful. The ones that had a lot of experience in that, about giving me tips. And of course, we had trainers in everything that we were doing. And their job was to make sure that I learned what I needed to learn, whether it was about the shuttle systems, or whether it was about keeping alive, in an emergency from an aircraft or a spacecraft. So I think you kind of just have to take it one step at a time. And, it's interesting. We didn't really use the term imposter syndrome back then. And I think in one way it's good, because it lets people know that a lot of people go through that, right? Because people have now sort of studied it and named it, and it's because a lot of people feel that. But on the other hand, I'm not sure I like the term syndrome, because that makes it sound like there's something wrong with you if you feel that way, like you have this syndrome. I'm like, wow, there's nothing at all wrong with feeling, a little bit insecure, feeling like, gosh, everybody knows this stuff and I don't because I'm new. I think that feeling of uncomfortableness is what helps propel you to work hard, to learn, to ask questions. I actually worry about the people who don't feel uncomfortable, because I think they probably aren't going to ask as many questions, and in the end, they may not learn as much. They may not realize how much they should be learning from everybody around them, because they think they already know this stuff. And I actually, in a lot of ways, think that's more dangerous, and especially in a field like ours, where you have to think about safety and being able to respond in an emergency. So you should just realize, you're continually going to be in situations where you're new, you don't know as much, and it's really about how you decide how to attack that. Just one day at a time, one piece of information at a time, one new experience at a time.
That is such fantastic advice, and I 100% agree. Like, I think everyone feels a bit out of place and insecure sometimes. That's just kind of part of, like, human nature. And so I think that by naming it imposter syndrome, we might almost brush off that, drive to improve and drive to get rid of that feeling in a sense.
For sure.
And so, like, rather than saying, oh, I have imposter syndrome, like, I'm not going to try to improve because this is just something that I struggle with and I have to, it's just a part of me. Like, learning how to say, okay, I feel this way, what can I do to feel a little bit better?
Exactly. And I feel like every time that we go into a new environment, or, we're surrounded by people that we don't know, or topics that we don't know, it's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking like, oh, I just don't belong here and everything, when really it's just so important that uncomfortability is used to grow.
Exactly. And so I know we're running a little short on time here, so I just wanted to ask you one final question that we like to ask everyone on our podcast, and that is, what do you do every day that brings you a small bit of happiness?
Well, one of the things I do is play my flute. I started playing flute when I was 10 and played pretty seriously all through school, high school, college, graduate school. I gave some solo recitals. Even when I started working as an engineer, I was in the local symphony in Livermore. And I went for quite a number of years after I started in the astronaut office of not playing with any group, but I always tried to at least practice a little bit on my own. And now that I'm retired from a full-time job, I do a lot of other things, but retired from a full-time job, I'm playing flute in a couple of groups again. And so music is something that's always been really important to me. And then just walking outside. I live in Boise, Idaho now, and we live both near the river that runs through town as well as near the hills in town, and so getting out every day and walking. I remember when I was getting ready to retire, and another astronaut friend who had also retired from NASA said, every day I try to do something intellectual, something physical, and something spiritual. And for me, the spiritual part is the music. And so I thought that's a really good way of doing it, and that's what I really need to sort of have that happiness in my life. So I've tried to follow that as well.
I love that. I think it's so important to have like a musical instrument or something that you love that you can play
And also express your creativity.
Exactly, and bond with other people as well. I mean, having those groups are so fantastic for also being able to, have a group of people outside of just, your home life that you're able to spend time with and bond over your own personal interests.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Ellen, for joining us today. We've learned so much, and it's so beyond inspiring. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You guys just do a fantastic job, and it was wonderful to have a chance to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness.
And thank you so much to Dr. Ellen Ochoa for joining us. This has been such an incredible interview, and I learned so much. She's such an inspiration and just a change maker in our world. Anastasia, what is your biggest takeaway from today?
I 100% agree. She is absolutely amazing. I think my biggest takeaway has definitely been that, once you get rejected, it's okay. It's not personal, but you just need to keep growing and you need to elevate yourself and get better and look at what you're interested in. She didn't just take up flying because she thought, oh, this is going to look good on the paper, but she was also like, this is something I'm interested in. And so finding things that, will make you better, will make you more interesting, will elevate you, but at the same time that you're still passionate about. What about you, Mercedes?
I love that so much, and one of my greatest takeaways from Dr. Ellen Ochoa today is the fact that even if you feel like you have a sort of imposter syndrome, as it's called kind of widely on a societal basis, don't let that stop you from trying to improve and grow and overcome those feelings. Don't let them paralyze you. You are not, meant to always be the expert of absolutely everything. So learn how to be uncomfortable and get better at what you're weak at.
If you enjoyed this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness, please leave us a 5-star review from wherever you're listening. It really helps us out and we really appreciate it.
Also, be sure to join our happiness family. It's completely free and we'd really love to have you, and then you'll never miss another episode. And you can do that by following Hack Your Happiness on whichever podcast listening platform you're on now. See you next time!